Hello and welcome to The Man Who Kept Dying. If you've been following the last few videos I did, you will have noticed that I moaned quite regularly about the weather. So, in a way, I would be remiss if I did not start this video by giving you a quick weather update. At the time of recording, it is raining, but we've had a few beautiful days, 5 consecutive sunny days this week. So I cannot complain. A bit of rain, nature needs it. And that's it. I'm going to stop complaining about the weather. Hopefully, now we have reversed the trend, we can have 5 days of sunshine and 2 days of rain. And maybe a full week or a couple of weeks of full sunshine would be ideal because it is summertime now in France. Anyway, I hope you're doing okay as you're watching this video. This specific one is about chapter 23. Yeah, it's a pity that I have to check, but yes, it is chapter 23 in the novel, which is titled Time. I would like to explore the ideas I had when I was writing this specific chapter, and for a bit of a change, I have also prepared a few slides to explain or share with you my view about time from both a physical and a metaphysical standpoint. But first, let's start with the novel itself, chapter 22. As we progress through the novel, the main character, Mika, after he meets with his guardian angel and then his spirit guides, has quite a few conversations with them about different topics, about life and so on. But there comes a point in the novel, which is roughly halfway through the novel, after which the spirit guides do decide to send Mika on his own to explore the metaphysical world. And as he does so, Mika gets to encounter the creator. And in the novel, I didn't want to refer to the creator as God. I didn't want to use any religious terms, or I didn't want to refer to God, for the very particular reason that it's not my role to present God in a religious manner, so to speak. And also, I have no desire to go into the religious side of things. It's more like faith, belief systems, and so on. And my own ND, to me, has shown me that the idea of God, what we would call the creator and so on, actually is a whole, a unity. And I know some people in the more spiritual spheres call it or refer to it as all that is, which I think is quite accurate, but it seems to be a bit more than just that. Anyway, in the novel, Mika gets to meet God, we will say, which I have decided to label like as the central point of consciousness. As I just mentioned, didn't want to refer to it as God. And as he gets to meet with the central point of consciousness, of course, there are lots of back and forth conversations, and the central point of consciousness actually appears as multiple personas, so to speak. So one moment it would be an old, very austere man, the other moment it would be a beautiful woman, and next it would be a bird, and then it would take the form of a bench. And it would just show to Mika that it can be he, she, it, many different forms. So as those conversations do unfold, at one point Mika really questions how time operates. Because when you are in human form, you do have the sensation, or the impression perhaps is a better word, that time is very linear, when in fact it is everything but. So I decided to play with that chapter and thought, if I was given like a blank sheet and I could do anything I want with time, so if I was the creator, if I were, speak good English Vincent, if I were the creator and I could do anything with time, what would I do? The idea then blossomed in my mind that the creator and the spirit side is sort of eternal, and as a game they decided like, well, we'll have something that is temporary as an experience, because we know what it is to be intemporal. So let's experience what it is to be temporal or to have a limited lifespan. Of course, Mika disagrees strongly with that because he believes and he thinks that the experience is quite difficult at times, but that's the gist. And I just went through the idea that everything is already written. It's all about which path you take. And for example, one of the ideas the central point of consciousness explains to Mika is that you can take on a physical body, but then you can decide all the different parameters. So say the life of Mika is already written and Mika has got like a specific body. Every other spirit could decide to also incarnate, for lack of a better word, but go through the life of Mika. And because they would have a different level of consciousness, they would make different choices. And as a result of making different choices, they would experience a completely different life, even though the starting point might be the same. So what the creator, God, the central point of consciousness, explains to Mika is that, for example, another soul or spirit would take Mika's body, but would start doing bodybuilding, would have tattoos, would play the guitar, things that Mika doesn't do. And Mika, of course, it completely blows his mind because his perception of time having always been quite linear until then, realizes that he can make any choice he wants in his life. And actually, if somebody else was to live his own life, that other spirit or soul would live it very differently and resulting in different outcomes. So everything is sort of pre-written. It's just about how you go through life and the decisions you make in life. And it is something I've observed in my life too. It's the fact that sometimes it's about how you react to a situation, and whether you react to it positively or negatively can have an impact on the next event or the next string of events and so on. And I've always wondered when I was a little kid, sometimes it seems to me like people who are more upbeat, people who are happier generally seems to have more luck in life, so to speak, or generate better outcomes, even if these are simple outcomes. I'm not talking about, becoming a millionaire or winning the lottery. I'm just sharing the experiences of people who just are happy with simple things, or the fact they're always positive. They might find like a note or some money on the street and they might pick it up and right away give it to somebody else who needs it more than they do, and then they keep finding more money. And for whatever reason, it seems like there are these dynamics. And I was observing that when I was younger, how basically your thought or your mind can shape how you experience reality, to a degree, of course, because there might be moments or there might be events that perhaps you've chosen to go through. So you may want to avoid something at all costs, but you may have no choice but to go through it. Essentially, where I'm getting at with that is the idea that, yes, if you could do anything you wanted with time, those are the things I would try to do. Just have like a predefined map and be able to explore it whichever way I want to. The analogy the central point of consciousness uses for Mika, because Mika challenges that, okay, time is not linear, we can do anything we want, but please explain to me why we have night and day. Please explain to me why we have the cycles of the sun and the cycles of the moon and so on. And the central point of consciousness to this simply replies that there has to be like a common agreement between different spirits to have a shared experience. So it's a bit like a video game. The players and the characters would all be different, and we decide on which type of avatar they would take, what they would look like, and they can customize it at will. And once they're in the game, they can play the game whichever way they see fit. However, the game itself has been pre-programmed. So the landscape, the cycles, nature, and all those things, they do exist to sustain the reality or the landscape in which the players are going to play. And of course, players playing with each other have interactions, and of course they just interact, and any interaction or every interaction you have has an impact on the other players. Essentially, that's how I conceptualized the whole chapter around time. The next chapter that follows in the book, and for which I will do a specific video too, is chapter 24, in which the central point of consciousness takes Mika to a potential future for Mika. And Mika gets to experience something he's never experienced before. More of that in the next video. Coming back to the notion of time. My understanding of time through studying or research I did on the spiritual side has changed or evolved since I wrote the novel. And what it is today is a complete different understanding of that too. So I'm going to share a few slides. I'm going to switch the screen for a change. Hopefully that works okay. I'm going to share my understanding of time as it is today. First of all, what I would like to explain before we dive into the topic of time is the notion of consciousness or vibration, whether you vibrate at a low or a high frequency. The idea being the higher you vibrate, the more consciousness you get access to from the spirit side, and perhaps the better the understanding you can get about reality and being able to take a step back and understand reality in different ways. So this information, 333,000 megahertz, is information that's not from me. It's something I've listened to a channel, Daryl Anka, which channels an extraterrestrial being named Bashar. Very useful information. I said in the past that I don't really listen to channels who don't channel humans, but I find that Bashar has got really good, solid explanations, and it's not just metaphysical. He can explain human emotions, the thought, the belief systems, and so on. I find it quite interesting, and it does make sense to me. It resonates with me. Also, one interesting thing about him is, for the past 40 years that Daryl Anka has been channeling Bashar, the information has never changed. So it's pretty consistent, which is always a reassuring fact when it comes to this type of information, because I would always say, take it with a pinch of salt, go through your own experience too, and make your own assessment based on your own experience. But what Bashar explains is, basically, on the human side, up to a frequency of 333k megahertz, you're on the human side. If you go beyond that, that is the threshold with the spirit side. How do we know at which vibration we are vibrating at the conscious level? I have no clue. If you do know, leave a comment. I'd be curious to know. But essentially, I'm clueless about, or I do not have an answer to share with you to know exactly where you situate yourself. Perhaps the best way would be to see the kind of emotions you have. So what he would say is that threshold between the spirit side and the human side is what some people would label the higher self, which is not the soul. According to Bashar, is something different. Yet again, the soul sits even higher than the higher self, but the higher self basically is the best version of yourself. Let's put it that way. So if you were to be the best version of yourself with a complete understanding of physical reality or the human side, you would be very close to your higher self. The higher self has got all the answers to all the questions. It knows the path, as Bashar would explain, and basically it walks alongside you, the human. And say you were to situate yourself there, what would be the difference between where you are and being as close as you possibly could from your higher self or the highest version of yourself? Basically, according to Bashar, your belief systems, what you focus your attention onto. So before thoughts, Bashar would explain that according to him, belief systems are more important than emotions that are more important than thoughts. And very often as humans, we tend to think that thoughts are very important. But actually, if you really dive deep into why you have a thought, why you have an emotion, you will always find that there's a belief system behind it. I've done the work myself, and I can say that it is very interesting to do so. And you might find belief systems that you have and that absolutely don't belong to you. They belong to somebody else, or they've been passed to you, or you acquired them. But when you really take a deep dive, go within, basically you realize that those belief systems, they hold no value, because that is not who you are as an individual. So anyway, I know we digress a bit, but it is important to take into account when it comes to time. So just to continue to highlight this specific context, and I was talking, what makes you go higher in the vibration scale, what makes you go lower. I would say the emotions or the feelings or the attitude you have. So, if your take on life is about love, joy, compassion, you have a positive mindset, you're likely to, be higher on that vibration scale. However, if your life is seen through the perspective of fear or greed, a need for power, and power, we have to be careful, because I mean more power in the sense of dominance, power over people, because there's a lot of beauty in power, in my opinion, when it is like a really balanced power. Power in a negative way, with dominance, with rage, kind of negative emotions, that keeps you at the lower end of the spectrum. And of course, if you were to go like through your life, the horizontal line being time/life, say mostly your vibration will be in the middle, as an example. Sometimes you will experience high emotions, but you will go back to your neutral or middle ground level of consciousness, or take on life, so to speak. And the same, you would have negative emotions from time to time, negative experiences, and you will go through them. And in a way, it's kind of a balanced place between the two, because it's equal between what you experience as high and what you experience as low. However, if you were to constantly be in a more negative mindset, or having a more negative outlook on life, what would happen, in my opinion, is that the moments of elation you would get in life, the higher moment where you experience something positive, they're a lot higher to get to. And when you get there and you fall back into your more negative outlook on life or perspective on life, it is a lot harder. And then you stay in those negative emotions. So it's a lot harder to get out of them, because they're more accessible to you. Conversely, if you are always like in a high positive mindset, you can go through negative emotions. That is life. You will still have negative emotions. You will still experience negative experiences. But because of the way you react to those experiences, you're less likely to spend a lot of time into that negative experience, or into that negative state of mind. Let's use that expression. And you will go back up to where you are. So you spend a lot less time in negative, and again, it's a lot easier to stay in a positive dynamic, because that's where you are. So it's less onerous, so to speak. So if we keep that in mind, that idea of the higher the vibration, the more positive mindset you have, the lower the vibration, the more negative mindset you have, and where you situate yourself. So imagine life. Now we're going to speak about time. And imagine life has already mapped that for you before you come into your body. You look at your life and you say, okay, what starting point will I have? So for example, I take the life of Vincent Olivier, and I could have started at multiple paths. To simplify the equation, I'm only highlighting 4 different paths. Bashar would explain in his explanations that there are basically billions of possible timelines, and that we're switching constantly between timelines. Me, for the sake of that presentation, I'm really oversimplifying it, and it's not just what Bashar explains, it also is my understanding that I'm highlighting through these slides. So say, for example, the starting point would be the red dot. So you could have started like with 4 different starts in life, but you decided to pick the red dot, basically middle ground plus. What will happen is The other parallel timelines, they are valid. As Vincent Olivier, they do exist. And they have, as you move through time, their own pathway or their own timeline, so to speak. And you decide you're going to go right ahead, and all the other timelines just carry on. But you're going to stay in that middle ground plus vibration. Nonetheless, you could have, right from the get-go, moved to a different timeline right away. Or could be a higher one, could be a lower one, could be a much lower one. And that's what could have happened. So every moment lived from the present moment, actually you can decide if you're going to go to a different timeline or not. And as you do so, your life changes. So we move on, and say the space between two dots, I don't know how much time it is. It could be 5 minutes, it could be 5 years. Again, I'm simplifying everything. But the idea is every moment it is possible to change. And again, the timelines would continue. Well, not all the time. Say, for example, that timeline, which is the red line, there's no continuation after this one. So what could happen sometimes is a specific timeline needs to end for whatever reason. If you go through it, it could be the end of your life, your death, so to speak. Or you can decide that, no, you don't want to die. You will carry on through a different experience. So imagine that this was my near-death experience in 2018, or one of my other 4 encounters with death, and in which I would say, well, actually, I want to carry on. So this path, this specific timeline, is the end for me. But on this timeline only, I can switch to a different timeline, and I'm going to switch to a slightly lower one because for whatever reason, I will deem the experience to be negative, so I will want to explore this one. But I could have switched to an even lower one if I had wanted to. All I know that is important is that those switches or those branches do exist, and I can take them anytime I want through conscious or subconscious choice. But then the same happens for every other timeline, and that's when you start to have a really complex matrix, because you start to see where we're going with that. Wherever you are, at whichever moment, you can choose what to do. And for example, say timeline at the top continues, and all different timelines, they do continue. And again, from that new point, I'm going in every direction possible there, but I'm going to, because my belief system continues to be a negative one, I'm going to go into a lower vibration state. So I end up like on the lower end of the spectrum. What's interesting to me at that specific moment is that every time I change a timeline, the line in red is the past I remember, because that's the past I'm creating for myself, and I can share my story. Hey, I'm Vincent Olivier, I've encountered death 5 times in my life. The 5th one in 2018 was a near-death experience. I'm sharing that experience. It made me write a novel. It made me do X, Y, Z. It made me change my perspective and my outlook on life, and so on and so on. However, truth is, as I'm moving along the dots, every time I get to a new dot, the past is the one from the new timeline I'm finding myself on. So the past I had, as I started, in the middle ground plus type of vibration, is not that past anymore. So the past also changes. And that goes back to something Bashar explains, that is that the past does not create the present. The present creates the past, or the past is created from the present moment, because you change. And basically you're a different person because you're using a different timeline. Of course, what happens in reality is that the shift is not so drastic that all of a sudden you wake up in a different property and you have a different partner in life, or you have different kids, or you have kids when you never had kids before, and vice versa. It could be, though, if you were to switch from, say, lower end of the spectrum to higher end of the spectrum, you could, I believe, absolutely wake up in a different life altogether. The reason it does not happen is probably because it's been programmed not to happen this way. Otherwise, it would be a bit of a shock to the system. But what if you start believing it is possible? in that case, it probably is possible that it could happen. I'm leaving you with that one because it's quite a complex one to wrap your mind around. But the possibility for me definitely is there. If we continue with that example, say there also are moments in life that you have chosen to go through something. And no matter which timeline you're coming from, you will have to go through that experience. That experience basically condenses all the timelines into one. Call it a node, call it however you want. That's the idea. So we get there, and basically we have no choice. Whichever timeline I'm on, that could be my near-death experience, that could be the car accident, for example, I will have to go through that experience. Because no matter what happens, I've decided it would be important in my life, wherever I am at, to go through it. And what's quite interesting in my example is now I'm coming from a lower vibration. And that very important event, actually, I'm seeing it from a better perspective because it changes my life. The line above, it would be neutral. The line at the top, it would be quite a drastic drop. But because that event is so important to me, it sort of like spurs or opens the door to the possibility of a better understanding about life and therefore reaching the potential for me being the highest version of myself or my higher self. And the other timelines, they do still continue to exist. So now I do have the options to move to any I so choose. And I decide, consciously or subconsciously, because of my reactions and belief systems and so on, that I'm going to sort of stay neutral in that one. And again, what continues there, history sort of repeats itself in the map. You can reach the higher self, you can reach the top self, and maybe the lower one just stops. So basically now I have new choices, but I also have choices that are not available to me anymore. So because of what happened, it's not really possible to stay in a very low vibrational state. So this one disappears and it can only go high up. And from there on again, whichever point I am, I can decide where to go. And I have my great awakening. I've got a great understanding of reality now. I'm at peace. Boom, I become the highest version of myself. But I could have decided not to, and you would have this complete map. As you can see, lots of possibilities, and I'm just really exploring what it could possibly be outside the realm of thinking about time in a linear manner. There have been many movies about time. You can think about Return to the Future, where they think like if you switch timeline in the past, you alter the present or the future. To me, my opinion is slightly different. Is you constantly move and shift, so you don't really go back in the past. You're always moving forward. However, what is happening is that you switch timeline. So in a way, you go up and down the vibration scale. Now, one important point I would like to make about that is the following one. It also made me question what really happens to other people when we switch timeline. Who are we interacting with? Because those people, they're always in our life. So take the near-death experience. If I had died, my wife, my parents, they would still exist. So they would experience a life in which I'm not present. And that really made me question things, because I came back and I experienced a life in which I am present. But the possibility of me not being present, or if I died in a car accident when I was a month old or 17 years old, my back-to-back emergency surgeries when I was 10 years old and so on, all those moments, for example, my parents, there are timelines in which I'm not there anymore for them. And that made me question, where is their consciousness? Am I interacting truly with my parents, or are they consciously living a very different timeline because it was their own choice to explore one of the timelines in which I'm not there anymore? I know that is a bit mind-boggling, and I really had to spend time wrapping my head around that one, but I believe that basically we're interacting with different consciousnesses all the time, and they make their own choices, so different spirits, different souls, whomever is around you. And it made me realize that it's very possible, I'm not saying it is the case, because it might not be, there may be collective choices too, But it's very possible that the people that I'm interacting with, their consciousness is exploring very consciously a different timeline than the one I'm on. And therefore, I'm interacting with a part of them, but not their full self. And the same goes for them. And that becomes very interesting. In the exact same way, if you see that slide, that's for one person, but you could apply it to all the different timelines about Earth, for example, collective agreements. So there could be one timeline in which the whole population disappears for whatever reason, and on the other end of the spectrum, everyone gets to live really happily, and all the different systems have evolved and we've changed as a species. We've really become like more mature, more balanced, and emotionally, physically, we got better understanding of nature, we treat each other better, and so on. So, and everything in between, different timelines. And it's all about where do you situate yourself as a person. That really got me thinking, because basically, in all the different Earth timelines, it would be the exact same thing. Perhaps I do exist on all of them, but consciously, I'm on the one I am right now as I am recording this video and sharing it with you. In other timelines, I may not be recording this video, but I may still be present for other people. And I'm not even conscious of that. So I'm going to stop there. With time, I realize, well, time is flying by because it's been almost like 30 plus minutes I've been talking about it. These are all the elements around time. Time is really a fascinating topic, I find. And not just, from a metaphysical standpoint, but just normal physics, trying to understand time, and this very notion that sometimes when you are, so to speak, engrossed in an activity that you do like, time just flies by. Whereas if you're doing something that is a chore, time will just be so slow. And our perception of time changes, our alignment with time changes too. And it's fascinating to me. Time is one of the topics that has fascinated me the most. And that's why I really had a good time playing with it in the novel, trying to imagine different scenarios and so on. I'm going to stop there. I hope you enjoyed this video. What is your opinion about time? Please share it with me. If you have some crazy theories as I have, please do share them. Love to have a conversation around those things, because it's always a bit mind-boggling, but it's always like good in a way to activate, your neuron path or pathways in the brain, and try to think about, if I could do anything about time, or if I could have control over it, then what would I do? What would I design? And it's quite interesting to me that perhaps reality has been designed this way for us to rediscover that actually we are constantly shifting through different timelines. And yes, we have the power to experience the timeline we want based on the conscious choices or subconscious at times choices we make. So it's very important to be aware of those. Let's stop there, shall we? Next video will be Mika seeing a potential future for himself, and the title of this chapter is Louis, which is a story based, of course, on a real encounter I had in the London tube. More of that in the next video. Until next time, of course, be conscious, my friend.